there's maybe things here and there that we can adjust. Predefined answers will not necessarily reflect how people really feel about a subject. In some cases, might just be the closest match. Yes, true. We need to predefine answers in terms to come to quantitative measures, and we'll come to that in a second. And you know, again, if I asked you how you feel about PART-6 on a scale from 0 to 10, you might be saying, I don't know, I feel about that policy I feel quite well, about that policy that I don't really like, that party leader is okay, but the minister is really annoying me. And that is very hard to put on a scale from 1 to 10, right? So again, reflect when we do quantitative stuff, what that actually means for the design of your study. In that case, would that maybe mean that you don't only rate a party on one question from a 1 to 10 score, but ask 10 questions about a party, about its policies, about its members, about different political issues, and so on and so forth? You know, that could at least be a deeper measurement, a better measurement of what people are. And this doesn't include, and we discussed that on the third day, I think, about this doesn't include what you could actually do with question formats. So we see in research that the way we ask questions influences the answers, and we need to be aware of that. The last point is one I'd also like to mention again. I'm not sure where the noise comes from.
It's a light filter.
Yeah, but
please switch off that mic.
It's not switching off. I did try it. There's a tape over it, and not if you press it.
Yeah, it's fine.
But you can put your phone away from it.
I have.
The last point, I read that out because it's again an important point. The development of standard measurements can lead to a structural bias and false representation, where the data actually reflects the view of the researchers instead of the participating subjects. That is important. When we design our studies, we have a certain idea in mind. You know, we talked about your study on conflict in the news in the Kashmir region. You come from the region. You have certain ideas in mind. You know about the conflict. You know the newspapers that you're looking at. To what degree does that lead you to come up with measures that are maybe biased, that are pushing your research findings in a certain direction?
Exactly, I experienced that, the sense of belongingness and the contextualization. You being a Kashmiri, maybe you are biased towards certain things related to human rights violation and all. Yeah, I saw that things and I experienced that.
Yeah, and again, it might be okay that that happens as long as you're showing that you're aware of that happening. And ideally it doesn't happen actually. But that's another issue. So there are clear disadvantages to quantitative methods, and some of them we can try to work on and try to adjust a bit one way or the other. Some of them we can't fix, but need to acknowledge that they're there. And when we position our research and when we motivate why we do certain things and take certain decisions, or reflect on our results and our results interpretation, be aware of some of these criticisms. Because they also, in the publication process, they will always fall back on you, right? You'll always have one reviewer who is critical of your methodological approach. And by writing these things, by making transparent why you came to certain decisions, you can prevent that from happening.
You were just talking about the biases the researcher might have relating to the, like you pointed his research out. But I have a question. Is it quantitative methodology a way to counter that biases? Because we have facts and we have methods to prove them?
No, definitely. I mean, it's definitely, the quantitative approach should be way less researcher bias, should show way less researcher bias than the qualitative approach, definitely. But still, the problem is that sometimes when you write a survey, or write a questionnaire, and you collect questions that you want to ask, that you think are appropriate for your research project, you still unawarely might build in a bias into constructing that questionnaire. That means the data that you're getting looks like very objective, quantitative data. But the fact that you put certain questions in there and other questions maybe not, might still show a researcher bias, which however it's much harder to detect. Because the numbers, the outcomes look so, objective and quantitative.
Maybe you want a particular answer from the question.
Exactly.
That's how you can.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, and I don't even think it happens very consciously in quantitative research. I think it's rather an unconscious process that we come with our ideas and that determines.
In qualitative, it may happen.
In qualitative, it does happen, and it's often also acknowledged. In conclusion sections in qualitative papers, you often see the acknowledgement of researcher involvement and bias. In quantitative, you never see that, although it might happen. Sorry.
Yeah, I just said that sometimes when we are working on article material,
Yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes we set our premises. That here you're talking about that. But I just want to re-emphasize that's the best, I think, an honest way to say that here are the limitations and here are the mistakes and here is my research. So you open up all areas of possibility for a new researcher to take.
I mean,
That's
in a
what
way,
we also said to make our methodology.
in a way, I mean, key to all of these things is transparency. As long as you're transparent in what you're doing and tell the full truth to your audience,
I never make an attempt, but here is the truth.
Yeah. But sometimes, especially in the quantitative research side, it sounds a bit like that.
Most of the scholarship is running around this side.
Yeah. Yeah. That's also us, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah. Sorry.
I just wanted like intervention or clarification. So what you're trying to say is maybe in rough words, when you're choosing a standard indicators or material indicators per se, like income or land or you have certain standard of it in that, so you don't have a problem. But then when you're trying to make indicators on opinion or on emotion or certain sorts, there's a problem with it. So how I think what you're indicating is standardization of your scale or your choice. So how do we do that?
Well, we come to scale development a bit more thoroughly on the third day, but I'm not even sure it goes for the income thing. I mean, you can measure income in various different ways, and you can measure income in a way that maybe suits your research interests more than others. So, even in surveys, I could ask you how much do you have per month. I could ask you how much does your family have per month, which is if both are working, that's a very different question, especially if there's lots of differences between. You could ask me, how well do you get by with your money? Is there still something left of the account at the end of the month? Which is still a very different question. I'm earning a lot and there's still not much left by the end of the month. So that would give a perception that, so there's very, very different types of how you could assess income. And some of those might be more appropriate for certain questions than others, and you might unintentionally choose the one which is maybe giving you the better answer. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, that the choice of what we're doing could determine what we find, and we need to be aware of it. But you're right, there's certain things we can measure much more easily than others. For example, measuring emotions indeed is a very tricky thing, and measuring age of a respondent in a survey is fairly easy. That's true. So there's a clear difference between those. Again, we'll come a bit more towards scale development and questions on the third day actually.
Is that bias necessarily bad? Sometimes if I care about my research question and I'm including questions of the sort, that's nice, right?
No, I don't think it's very hard to do totally unbiased research in the social sciences. I mean, natural science is very different, but social sciences, being totally unbiased, I'm not sure whether that's actually possible at all. I'm saying this because I think we need to be, when we do quantitative research, we're often not aware of the fact that that's the case. As quantitative researchers, we often claim we're working in an objective manner. And I think having this opportunity talking to so many people, it's something I would really like to emphasize, that be aware of the fact that even when you work with numbers and statistics, there still might be problems involved.
But if you are biased, let's say subjective, the element of subjectivity comes in. which is not bad.
I mean, as long as you're aware of it, it's not bad, but we should still, as quantitative researchers, try to avoid it as much as possible.
And you stated perhaps that's the next step of making it more, less biased and
Yeah, exactly. If you state it, if you're aware, especially if you're aware in the research design phase, you can also try to avoid it more. Again, this I thought was a funny little comparison, making and maybe helping you reflecting on comparing the data man and the data free man in terms of quantitative and qualitative design. But it's reiterating many of the things that we talked about already. So all this, and we come a bit more into the research process of quantitative research projects. All this also has to do with what we do in research in terms of induction or deduction. And I go over that fairly quickly, I think. So deduction tries to move from a general to the specific. The deductive approach takes a theory, or at least a somewhat theoretical framework. From that draws certain expectations that we call hypotheses, and then we apply usually a quantitative design to test those hypotheses, or at least an empirical design to test those hypotheses. So deductive approaches theory testing, whereas inductive approaches try to come from specific statements to more general observations, work from the specific to the general, and thereby try to develop, to formulate theory or hypotheses, which would be again much more tied to qualitative type of approaches. People interested in this and never heard about this, I'm sure it's translated in English, but coming from Vienna, I have to mention the big Positivismusstreit. I'm not even sure how it translates into English. A big argument between Adorno and Popper in the 1960s. That very much relates to what we're discussing here, and we don't have time to go fully into that, but Karl Popper was a big Vienna scientist. A couple of examples here, and this is not the best, but it's one of the things that one finds. So deduction works from a theory, all birds fly, makes a specific observation, the cardinal is a bird, and therefore draws the conclusion that the cardinal can fly. Right? Whereas the induction would say the cardinal is a bird that flies, and there's a robin that is a bird that flies, so it seems like all birds are flying. So here's the theory that then feeds into here. Again, deductive approach, from drawing from theory to observation. Inductive approach, drawing or building from observation to theory. And you saw it already when I just, here's the theory, here's the theory. Yes, and now you connect the two into what is the wheel of science. And this is where it becomes clear how, I think, quantitative and qualitative approaches, how inductive and deductive approaches very nicely can feed into each other and can complement each other. You make empirical generalizations, building theories. From those theories, draw concrete expectations, hypotheses to be tested again in observations, and so on and so forth. Just as a little example again, so the deductive method, this would be a hypothetical study about the success in exams depending on the hours of studying, which is always a nice example to do with students. Exams, hours of study. The hypothesis drawn from logical thinking, theory, and so on and so forth would be a clear linear relation. So the more you study, the better your grades are, right? So that's the deductive method. We have an idea about reality, a hypothesis basically. We formulate that hypothesis, Then we add observations. So these are data that we collect of many, many students. And we assess their hours of studying, and we assess their grades, and we can plot these data into a figure. And then we compare the data that we collected, the observations, with our hypothesis. And now this is a statistical operation, whether we would say the hypothesis is supported or rejected. And to me, this looks like a fairly good support of the hypothesis. Right? But then, here we would conclude, yes, there's a linear relationship. Whereas in the inductive approach, we would first make observations. We would talk to a couple of people and come to an assessment of what is actually the relationship. Do we see that people who seem to work a lot do get better results, and so on and so forth. So we have these observations, and then based on these observations, we try to find a pattern in the observations. And this pattern then allows us to formulate theoretical assumptions. Now the interesting thing in this example is that this theory is probably going to be supported by these observations, but these observations might lead to a slightly different theory. Here the theory would be studying a bit actually helps quite a bit, then studying a bit more is not really helpful, but studying really, really a lot, really, really hard again is very good. So don't do mediocre studying. Either just a bit and live with the result, or do a lot. So we might be getting a deeper picture based on this approach, which could feed into a new theoretical assumption. And if we were to put this here, we find support for the theory based on observations. This is trying to put it all together, and I didn't come up with it, but I think it's a nice way to show how quantitative and qualitative approaches contrast each other, but also to some degree speak to each other, can be bridged in terms of triangulation. So you see, it's about quantitative distribution, prediction, large samples. We said all that. It's theory testing. It's generalizable. It's looking at causality, reliability. We heard of already, measurability, and so on and so forth. We covered all that. Here it's about explicit assumptions, smaller samples, improvement of understanding, theory development, reflexivity, transferability, credibility in terms of transparency, maybe also. Context richness, fuller, broader understandings of what's going on. Again, covered all this, and maybe the best projects would do something of both worlds, and thereby build on a bridge that holds. I'm a bit hesitant saying that because I know that it's a lot of work, and I know that many of you involved in PhD research can be happy if they handle one or the other part well already, and it's going to be a lot to add a totally different facet to it. I also know that training is important here. You know, some of you are well trained in quant and not in qual, some of you vice versa, and you need to enter a whole new world basically in order to do this convincingly. But some sort of triangulation might be very, very important for good quality research. But you seldomly see it. It's which again has to do with training opportunities, with career opportunities. Usually careers are built on certain methodological approaches, and people stick with those approaches and are having a hard time switching. It's also sometimes the language that is being spoken is very different in qualitative or quantitative research, and you need to be open towards wanting to understand the different languages. And although I'm a hardcore quant guy, I find it very important for us that we try to speak to each other and try to also see the advantages of what both sides bring to the table. And that's something which, from my experience, is sometimes very hard to accomplish. And I've worked in one department at least where we had a very tough divide between qualitative and quantitative, going very far and very personal. And that's, I think, we're all doing science, and we all want to come to a better understanding of what's going on out there. So, it's not worthwhile, and a bit more openness towards the other spectrum, I think.